This is part 2 of last week's podcast. Welcome to the Church Security Through Prevention podcast, and I'm your host, Daniel Blevins. My guest today is not a stranger to the podcast or the church security community. Paul Buckner, who is one of the church safety guys, contacted me about a situation that happened at a church near him that he was consulting with. This is a great example of how fast something can go wrong, and fortunately for this church, there was no loss of life. As we unpack this incident, there are many other things within this that are discussed, and I'm sure that could even go deeper in your own training. As usual, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the podcast, as well as do a Google review for us. All right, so let's talk with Paul and learn more about the wake-up call that this church had and so many need to have. Part 2 of this podcast will come next week. I hope that you'll come back as I continue my conversation with Paul Buckner.
Yeah. Do we have time for a short story?
We have plenty of time.
Oh, rock on. So I was pulling security for an event where a bunch of first responders were there, and you had ex-military guys. Some of these guys they were highly trained to go in, and then some of them not so much. And one guy showed up and he had all the tactical gear, and God bless him, he was probably wearing $2,000 or $3,000 worth of gear. And he was Gucci'd out, as they say. And he had a situation happen where his
Tactical.
He was very tactical. And he's not a bad guy. He's a good guy, but he was just super tactical, and the training wasn't there. And that's why he was there that day. He was a gun collector, a gear collector. And I think he'd begun to realize he needed some training. And so he accidentally muzzled one of the instructors. And that instructor handled it pretty well, but the other instructor was in his face screaming, spittle flying, knife handing him. And, asking him what his malfunction was. And so he was shaking and was having trouble breathing. And the more calm of the instructors who actually got muzzled, he was like, hey, you need to go over, breathe in through the mouth, hold it, and he was trying to explain tactical breathing to this guy. I didn't know that. So I'm over here, I'm the chaplain, I'm pulling security, I'm loading mags for people, I'm praying with people. And really it was a ministry / security event. It's what we do, right? So right. I was just doing it in the secular world, and it was welcomed. Well, he comes over, he's trembling, he can't breathe, he's about to start hyperventilating. I got him a bottle of water. I'm huge about that bottle of water. If somebody doesn't have internal injury, to calm down, you can't hyperventilate and drink water at the same time. And then I started talking to him about what tactical breathing was. And I was like, do me a favor. And I went through it with him, and he was able to restore his breathing. I like to say that we're only about 6 breaths from a different state of mind, i.e.
Right.
We could be hyperventilating pretty quickly, or we could actually have proper oxygenation of the brain. And so the end of the story was he was sitting there and he was about to pack it up and leave. I mean, he was done. He was humiliated. There was probably 30 people watching, and I get it. And he's like, I'm done. He's like, I can't do this. And I looked at him. I said, well, listen, I would much rather fail, to your point. I would much rather fail in this kind of an environment than when my life was on the line. And I said, they want you back out there. I would encourage you to go back out there and get on the line. Because again, this is a controlled environment where you can fail and survive. And so he did, and he did very well.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a matter of just getting over that, and we talk about it a lot. It's the pride that we have, and not so much arrogance in what you're describing, but for us guys, it's pride and arrogance that we often struggle with most. And that's what kind of keeps us from wanting to say, okay, yep, I truly need training. I truly don't know it all. That if I don't train, then when the situation gets intense, I'm not going to rise to I'm going to sink to the level of my training. I'm not going to rise to the occasion like my mind thinks I'm going to, or my pride is saying I'm going to. And once we can get past that and let somebody really come alongside and say, you know what, that was good, but we can do better. So let's try it this way instead. Let's run it this way, or let's breathe this way. Let me teach you how to do this so that your muscles and your brain and everything have the oxygen they need to function appropriately, or as best they can in those situations.
Amen. Yeah, it's amazing. I had a police officer friend recently. Somebody tried to murder him, and I chaplained this guy. And it's a long story and it's an ongoing case. But this guy brought the wrong weapon to the fight, fired a birdshot target load shell at a police vehicle. My friend got hit by some glass and a couple of pellets, but he survived, and he got his gun back into the fight, and he put rounds into the vehicle that the guy had come out of to try to kill him. They abandoned the vehicle, blah blah, abandoned the shotgun, and that was a nightmare scenario for a police officer. It was, it was an ambush style attack, and those are the things that he's still unpacking that in his mind, and that's something I hope that people understand. When someone tries to kill you, if you have the ability to stay in the fight, like you just said, oxygenate the brain, control your breathing, you've trained under stress, your brain is going to go, oh, I've been here before. And if you've never trained under that stress, there are people that lock up, and he could have locked up and shut down. But when he realized, hey, you missed me, I'm still in this fight. And he took the fight back to the bad guy. The bad guy did not get away with the weapon. He abandoned the weapon. And the bad guy did not get away with the escape vehicle. And so it tied them to the crime. That's a great response to a terrible situation. And at the end of the day, everybody got to go home. The bad guy went to prison, but everybody got to survive even.
Yeah, yeah, and that's what's key, particularly as we're serving our churches. We want to train people and to be trained so that, I joke about, so that I go home with the same amount of holes that I came to serve with in my body. I really don't want any additional ones. Yep, I might get a little banged up and bruised, but if I'm prepared, then hopefully the other guys ended up on the worst end of it, if that's what needed to happen.
I like how you said that you go home with the same amount of holes that you started with.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Because it's, our families are counting on us. We've got people that are counting on us. And if God has called us to serve in this capacity, then why not be serving in the best way that we possibly can? I mean, if we're called to the service of serving in the church, and why wouldn't we want to do it with excellence?
Oh, amen. Well said. Yeah, it's not a White Earth Club. That makes me think of two things. One is, and I'm going to preface this by saying, if you want to be part of a security team or a safety team and you feel called, but you don't feel called to carry a firearm, there could be still a place for you within your church. But
Absolutely.
I had a guy that was extremely qualified to carry. And he was saying he didn't see a need. There's a difference between he didn't feel like he needed to, and he didn't see a need to carry a gun in church. And I said, well, you're right. My Glock doesn't have the range of your fists. And his wife started laughing hysterically. And he has actually gone on. I talked to him recently. He's coordinating at his new church. He's actually helping coordinate a team, and he's got the equipment to do it. And then something about what you said, that so many times when you say something like, I want to go home with the same amount of holes in me, my wife's a nurse and she has this amazing ability. As a friend of mine says, she can tell you that your poop stinks and you'll thank her for it. And the reason I say that, I mean, I know that sounds odd, but in an emergency situation, sometimes you have to be able to look at somebody. And that's so much about that training beforehand through scenarios. Again, the body cannot go where the mind has not been. And my wife has done a lot of nursing over the years. And I dealt with a guy recently, 31 years old, had most of the telltale signs of a heart attack. And my brain was going, no way, there's no way. And I called it in. I got the ambulance there. Law enforcement showed up. I left, and I really wondered. I even did a little video about this in the church safety guys. Like, did it make a difference? Did I waste their time? And I talked to the officer later in the day, and he goes, yeah, they transported him. His EKG was all over the place. They think he was having a heart attack. And I'm going to dovetail this back to what we're talking about. Two things. One, when I was trying to get him to sit down, and he was not in a good state at that point, he said, well, I can't afford an ambulance. And I said, right, but being dead's pretty permanent. And I'm pretty sure there's some people that would like to have you back. And he kind of chuckled and he goes, okay, what do you need me to do? So to your point about how sometimes you can say things to people, that's very important. And two, when in doubt, there is no doubt when it comes to medical. And if we've talked a lot today about the threat of someone coming into our church to harm people. But I don't want anyone to leave listening to this podcast and think that's the only thread. And you don't teach that. I don't talk about that. But 99% of what we're ever going to deal with is going to be medical. And as a friend of mine said, whose brother-in-law is an ER doctor, and they teach medical to churches, that you really have to step outside of, well, this guy's young, it couldn't be a heart attack, or this person's this, it couldn't be a stroke. No, if you're getting the symptoms, if in doubt, that's above your pay grade. Let other people sort it out.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that medical piece is huge. I kind of, when I talk with churches and they say, "Well, we don't know what to train on," and it's like, really, and I give them, and that's a whole different podcast we could talk about another time.
Yeah.
But medical is very much part of it, and that's why we've had medical people on the podcast, because people need to realize that that's more likely what you're going to have to deal with in your churches than anything else.
Amen. Yeah. Yeah.
So let's pivot for a second here. And so, for people that may not know, tell us, because you're part of the church safety guys. So, tell us about the church safety guys, what you guys do. I know a new book just came out because it got sent to me. It's in. I'd have it in front of me if it wasn't already at my office at my new job, sitting on my credenza there. But so, talk a little bit about what you guys do and the resources that you have.
So James McGarvey, Mike Scully, and myself are the church safety guys, and there are some folks who work in the background who go unsung that make sure that that what we do happens. But we're the spokespersons, and basically the church safety guys came out of James McGarvey's heart, where he saw a lot of groups popping up on Facebook and other social media platforms. There was a lot of arguing and debating, and quite honestly, a lot of posturing. And he's like, none of that here. And he wanted to create an environment initially on social media where you could go and get resources, because so much of what we had to do, we started from scratch. We learned by failure. And so he wanted to help people to be able to learn without the stories that we just shared. And he created an environment that one post would be posted about, for instance, a terrible incident that happened in a church, and then people would talk about it, and you would go back to that post. And so it streamlined things and simplified things, and he didn't allow some of the nonsense. And it created an environment where the ego got checked. And that became live broadcasts, and we posted a lot of videos in there. He kind of brought me on board. We have a very similar heart, and we want to serve with a ministry first, heart. And we were like, wow, this is, kindred spirit, the brother I didn't know I had. And that has become books. That has become all podcasts. That has become all kinds of things. And people appreciate the fact that we are transparent. So as painful as conversations are like the one that we had today, that transparency can save lives. And that's one of the biggest things we're about. There are, if you look up James McGarvey on Amazon, there are several books out there. Too many to name in one setting. I think there's 7 or 8 now. And then he and Mike Scully wrote this book, and you'll have to name the title so that I don't butcher it. But it's basically going back to basics and saying, kind of like, without love, we're only a resounding gong. It's saying, hey, this is the life cycle of the church safety team, but it has to come from a servant's heart first. It has to come from a place of, we love God, and our heart is to lead people to Christ first. We're not the sanctified secret service, as you say.
Right.
And so what's the name of that book? Yeah. Engage, train, and retain. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's one of the biggest problems. If you've been on a church safety team for more than 10 minutes, especially in a leadership position, is helping to keep people motivated and keeping that heart. And so we're in a really fascinating, awesome era of church safety. It's really coming into its own. There are potentially degrees coming out of universities now, and churches are really starting to take notice. I had a couple come to my church about 3 weeks ago, and they know me. And they were like, okay, so doctrine and safety team, and do you guys vet your volunteers before you let them work in your youth area? And in that order. And we had a really great conversation. I referred them to a couple of resources, and I hope to see them back. people are really in the laity, people who are in our congregations, they're literally asking these questions now, saying, I want my family to be safe.
Yep. Absolutely. People are realizing more and more. And like I've mentioned on the podcast before, but I don't know that you and I've talked about it. I had an individual last year on that is his job is being a secret shopper to churches. And
Mm,
what he has found is that particularly young families are will visit a church, but they won't stay if there's no security, no organized security team presence at the church. They
yeah.
recognize what the world is like today, and that if the church isn't concerned about their safety or the safety of their children, then that's not one that they want to attend.
Wow.
And so you're seeing a lot of, we've seen it across the country, a lot of your older churches that aren't growing or moving or changing the mindset to with what, how God is moving and in the world and how Satan is moving in the world, then people are just aren't interested in attending a church like that. So it's not just about the teaching or the worship so much anymore. They're finding that more and more, particularly with young families, that it is that safety and security component that people are considering when they are looking for a new church to attend.
Well, and to your point about churches dying, when you don't take these things seriously, and it's a generational thing, it's gonna cause that. But on the flip side of that is bad people will seek out an environment where we see it with people, they volunteer with the Boy Scouts, or they volunteer with Boys and Girls Club, and you hear these nightmare stories. Those are great organizations, but these are people who are wolves. They are literally presenting themselves as sheep. They're coming into these environments, and they are there to steal, kill, and destroy. And if we don't take these things seriously, we're seeing more and more where churches are actually being targeted by evil people who are there to harm children, especially.
Right.
And it used to be, and I mean, and you probably grew up in this environment too. By the time you'd attended three services, they were ready to put you as a volunteer with the youth group, or driving the bus, or helping out in the nursery. It doesn't work that way. You can't do that. And so with these smaller churches that still have a 1950s and 1980s way of looking at the world, and God bless them, but they are becoming targets for very, very terrible things, and legally and morally they're liable.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's more and more, that's a great point because it's got to be a wake up call for churches. Um, we don't live in the same culture that we once did, or the churches that, the church I grew up in, I talk about, to where we used to, as soon as Sunday school ended, we all just bolted from the classroom and went wherever we wanted to out in the, throughout the church. And our parents never really were too concerned about it as long as we showed up for the service on time, and we're sitting with them.
Yeah.
But other than that, it was pretty much a free come and go environment, with very little concern about what the kids were doing or not doing and so on. And that's just, I've seen that in churches still today, surprisingly, and some of it's the smaller churches. And when I've done threat assessments at these churches, that's one of the biggest things I write up. It's like, you can't do that. Abduction of children in churches is a real thing.
Yeah. Well, and a friend of mine, I'm not going to tell the denomination, but he's a member of a large, well-known denomination. And he told me, he said their denomination is being targeted right now. And I said, really? This was several years ago. And I said, really? And he said, there is an individual who is crossing multiple states. And what he's doing is he knows the right verbiage. He knows how to dress, and he is going into these churches, and he's doing it right as their first service ends and right as their second service starts. He's finding an unattended child, and he's saying, oh, hi, I'm Bob, I'm your, and they have like a kind of like a youth leader position that there's multiple people that do. And he said, I need to get you ready for your next. And he's targeting, he knows this denomination, which means unfortunately he probably grew up in it.
Sure.
And he's targeting them, and he's wily. He's like that wolf at the edge of the flock, and he's looking for that young child to harm in this case. And law enforcement's involved. I don't know that it's been resolved, is the terrible truth. And he gets a child off to the side and he harms them, and then he leaves, and they have yet to catch this guy. It's terrible.
Yeah. Yep. Um, so the churchsafetyguys.com is where they can find more information on the books and resources. And then Sunday nights is when you guys do your live Facebook broadcast that also ends up on YouTube and various other resources as well. What time is that?
It's 6 Central. That's the important time, right? Because I'm Central Time. But it's 6
Well,
Central.
honestly, I felt that Mountain Time was God's time, but everybody else seemed to think that. Yeah.
Well, I guess you could be on that mountaintop experience with God.
Yeah.
That's probably one of the neatest things for people who've maybe never heard a broadcast is God has opened a door, and we walk very humbly in it. God has opened a door where we just interviewed John Correa. We've got interviews coming down the pipe with people who people we've interviewed Carl Chin, we've interviewed Frank Pomeroy, we've interviewed Stephen Williford, and had really powerful conversations yourself with folks. And I'm honored. I have been able to develop friendships with people who have the genuine heart for ministry, and we're trying to help them, more people in the world, to know about them. And sometimes we just need to hear the same topic talked about a different way. And it has been an incredible journey to watch God open the doors for us to talk to people about fire safety and all kinds of medical and de-escalation and body language and all these different things that make the fully developed church safety team member. And I, especially with last week's interview, when we did the interview with John Correa has had an enormous impact on me personally, on my training ethic. And this year I'm starting jujitsu. And that has had an enormous impact on the way I think. And I'm going to go fanboy for a minute, Dan. That the same thing is true with podcasts like yours. I listen to these when I drive, and hopefully I'm preaching to the choir, because the people hearing this probably listen to your podcast religiously. But that's the thing we've got to do. Is it's not something that we do on Sunday for a couple of hours. It's a lifestyle, and if we do it right, it'll bless us at home or out at the restaurant or in the mall.
Yep. That's absolutely true, and that's part of that constantly be training or constantly be learning is a discipline. I know that you have in your life, I have in mine, to where I'm constantly I have a book that is going to grow me in one way or another, whether it's spiritually or on security or otherwise. It's vital that we continue to grow and to physically and otherwise. Otherwise, we're just not prepared for life in general and what Satan's going to throw at us in the days to come. So it's critical. Go ahead.
I said, as Colonel Grossman would say, "Oorah."
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Now, on the law enforcement side, you've started your own podcast, correct?
I have. It's called Beside the Badge. It's slowly growing, and it's basically geared towards law enforcement and blue family, encouraging. I try to keep the good ones behind badges. So yeah.
And that's one if you have law enforcement friends out there, which most of us in church security know somebody, that it's a good way for them to get plugged in as well into another podcast opportunity of encouragement, and stories are shared, and they may reach out, and you want to share some of theirs as well on to help others.
Yeah, you make a great point there. I have to strip away certain details from stories, but I've had people contact me and tell me these unbelievably painful stories, and I've got several folks now who've told me, "Hey, before I talked to you," and a lot of this is local, even before the podcast started, but they'll say things like, I had written my resignation letter, or I was really seriously kicking around getting rid of my commission, and I was gonna go drive a truck or go to work in an office, and the pay's not great. The working conditions are terrible. Many police officers end up with pneumonia from working car accidents in the winter, and then people make fun of them because they're like, "Well, the only thing I see you do is stand around." And they don't realize that officer, that moment that you saw them eating or drinking a cup of coffee was the only time they'd had to stand still that day. And so it's really hard in our current political climate, where anything with law enforcement is vilified. It's really hard for these officers to dig deep emotionally and have that reservoir and go the distance. And we're losing good cops. And so I'm trying to be, a bulwark against that. And it's neat to have those conversations with people that say, hey, that really blessed me. You helped me realize that I was taking too much stress home. And some of the things you said helped me to not do that. So I love what I do in church safety. And I love what I do as a really crazy civilian police chaplain. And beside the badge is just one more aspect of that.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I really thank you for taking the time today to, share the story about what's happened, and then we've been able to expand on that and the importance of truly setting your security team up to succeed, and at least having one, as well as the importance of the variety of different ways that need to be trained. And there's a lot of resources out there. You can reach out to the church safety guys. You can reach out to me, and we can definitely steer you in the right direction to get the necessary training and resources to help you get going.
Amen.
Well, I have no doubt that we will be back on this podcast with you, Paul, at some point, right?
Absolutely.
All right. Well, thanks for your time today.
Appreciate your stand.
Thank you so much for taking time to listen to this podcast. If you really enjoyed it and you found it of benefit to you, we really appreciate your feedback. There's several different ways that you can provide us feedback. One of them is to subscribe to the podcast, is to share it with others, and another is to contact us directly, particularly if you have any questions or concerns, or you want more information on how to host a seminar in your community. You can contact me directly at danielblevins@cv@heart.com, or you can go to our website. That's cv-ministries.com. Both of those will get you in the right direction. Until next time, make sure that you're out there protecting the flock with a heart of service.